Good morning, everybody. All right, welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you were with me just a minute ago, apologies for the tech delay. Excited to talk today on the PT on Ice Daily Show podcast on the best day of the week here on the podcast, and that is Fitness Athlete Friday. And today we're going to be discussing a training technique loading strategy for muscle hypertrophy, and that is the 6-12-25 method, made by Charles Poliquin, a famous strength coach that passed away just a few years ago, but had a lot of impact on the strength world. So excited to chat with everybody about that today. Before we jump into the podcast, I want to share a couple of upcoming courses that we have on the fitness athlete side in terms of our live courses. This weekend, I'm headed to Oklahoma City for a sold out course. And next weekend, Mitch is coming down here to Charlotte to teach in my home gym for another sold out course. So we got 2 sold out courses coming up, but we do have 3 more courses by the end of the year that you can check out if you want to get into Fitness Athlete Live this year. And that is on October 22nd, Joe will be in Peoria, Illinois. On November 12th, Mitch will be in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And November 12th weekend, I will be in Bellingham, Washington. So check out those 3 courses if you want to get to Fitness Athlete Live before the year ends. So one thing we don't talk about a whole lot in physical therapy is muscle hypertrophy. But for so many of our athletes, this actually needs to be something that we consider is how do we make their muscle mass actually larger? So, great example of that is we've all seen that individual after an ACL reconstruction, they lose quad mass really, really fast afterwards, and we have to really work on rebuilding that. Maybe you even see somebody a couple of years after an ACL reconstruction, and you look at their quads and they still have a significant deficit side to side, but we don't talk enough about loading parameters for muscle hypertrophy as physical therapists. And I think the big thing to take away and that we need to know about muscle hypertrophy is that while we used to think that there was this special rep range, and you'd hear people say anywhere from like 6 to 15 reps kind of being ideal for muscle hypertrophy, what we now know is that we get a hypertrophy response from a really wide range of reps, anywhere from your 5 rep max all the way up to 30 rep max, as long as we take that to a high level of fatigue. Not 30 rep max, 30% of your 1 rep max. So you from a wide range of loading perspectives, as long as we take that to very close proximity to failure, we are going to see pretty much equal levels of muscle hypertrophy. So that's really great news for us. That means when that post-op ACL comes in and you're trying to kind of prevent muscle atrophy, and you're really limited in terms of what you can do from a loading perspective with them. You can't throw the heaviest squat on them early on post-op. So what we do then is we take whatever exercises we're prescribing for that person and we do it to a high level of fatigue so that at least we have a bit of a hypertrophy effect from that loading parameter. So that's really important to understand. And if you don't understand that stuff, then I really want to recommend that you go back. I did a previous episode on hypertrophy kind of years ago that you could probably find. But Brad Schoenfeld is probably the person to go read. He's put out a number of great articles around hypertrophy. He's done a virtual ice with us. So Brad Schoenfeld is kind of the go-to person when it comes to muscle hypertrophy. When we discuss muscle hypertrophy, there's kind of 3 different drivers of muscle hypertrophy. There's mechanical tension, there's muscle damage, and there's metabolic stress. And I want to kind of break down what those 3 are because it'll help you understand why I like this 6-12-25 Poliquin shock method for hypertrophy so much. So first, the first factor there is mechanical tension. So mechanical tension refers to the forces that are put on a tissue that's trying to stretch that material out. And mechanical tension is considered the primary driver of muscle hypertrophy. And this is pretty much impacted by the amount of load that we're lifting. So heavier loads increase more mechanical tension on the muscle, as well as the range of motion. So typically when we're going after mechanical tension, we're looking to do compound movements that allow us to move large amounts of weights through a large range of motion. The next factor you have is muscle damage. So when we kind of get into a little bit higher rep ranges of exercises, that's where we tend to create a little bit of more muscle damage. And that muscle damage is another stimulator of muscle growth. And then the final thing is metabolic stress as a driver of muscle hypertrophy. This is what's commonly referred to in the bodybuilding community as the pump or as the burn. And that's what happens when we break down fuel sources within the muscle. They create these metabolic byproducts that creates that little burn that people feel. So muscle hypertrophy is a result of those 3 different mechanisms. And when we do this 6-12-25 method, we kind of load somebody up and we hit all 3 of those mechanisms within one giant set. So this is what this workout would look like. We do a set of 6 with a compound movement that typically is going to use a large range of motion. And that set of 6 should be pretty heavy. So we're going to want that to be somewhere between maybe 3 reps shy of failure and actually hitting failure, depending on the individual's experience, if they have spotters and the safety of the equipment. But we want to be fairly close to failure on that first lift. It doesn't have to hit failure, but it needs to be pretty close to it. We're going to rest 15 seconds. So we're basically going to rest just enough time to transition to our next exercise, which we're going to do for 12 reps. And so that's going to be an exercise that's a little bit more targeted at creating muscle damage versus that first exercise, a little bit more targeted at mechanical tension, although those are not exclusive to each other. It's kind of a sliding scale there, not that at a certain rep range you change from one of those to the other. So we do 12 reps with a second exercise. We rest another 15 seconds, and then we hit a set of 25, which is really going after that metabolic stress component. Now, I got to say that set of 25 is typically the worst because you're already feeling it from the set of 6, the set of 12, and now you're just trying to pump through and fight through that horrible burn that's built up at this point of the lift. And you get done with the set of 25, and then we're typically going to rest for anywhere from 2 to 4 minutes after that. We want to give the body a lot of time to recover before we repeat that. Typically, 2 to 4 times is what I have my individuals do. And again, that just creates, in that giant set of 6, 12, 25, that creates a lot of volume. Muscle hypertrophy is highly related to the amount of volume that we do. It creates a lot of muscle damage, mechanical tension, metabolic stress. So this is just a great way to start encouraging hypertrophy in our patients. And so I want to give 3 examples of how I've used this in the last couple of weeks on actual patients to kind of give you some examples of how this is actually done in the clinic. So the first one is a patient of mine, proximal hamstring strain, doing pretty well. Kind of got back to running, tolerating that pretty well. Still gets bothered with prolonged sitting because that proximal hamstring doesn't like the compression from sitting so much. Still gets sore when they run, especially on speed work, but overall doing well. And we're at a point now where we really just need to be high level dosing and really working on that proximal hamstring. I've done a previous episode on proximal hamstring strains that you can check out if you want a little bit more details on that. But an important thing with proximal hamstring tendinopathies is that they don't tolerate a whole lot of volume of us loading them in hip flexion. While that's important because when we do something like a Romanian deadlift or a single leg deadlift, that will put a little bit more emphasis on the proximal hamstring. We have to also be cautious with our volume and dosage there because we can really easily overcook it. But those tend to very well tolerate doing hamstring exercises where the hip is in extension or not in flexion. And so for them, I bias their program towards a little bit of volume that is going to really target the proximal hamstring by starting the set of 6 with the Romanian deadlifts. So we're going slow tempo, focus on that hip hinge pattern. They're going to feel a little bit of irritation in that proximal hamstring. They're going to feel a good amount of work with that set of 6, but that's my purposeful loading on the proximal hamstring. Then my other 2 exercises are going to be targeted at just overall creating a hypertrophy stimulus on the hamstring, but in a hip extended position that's less likely to bother that proximal hamstring anymore. I kind of feel like one exercise of targeting that is typically enough for most of my proximal hamstrings. And then I target it in less provocative positions. So my set of 6 was a Romanian deadlift. My set of 12 was slider hamstring curls. So doing basically a glute bridge with the heels on sliders, extending the knees out, curling the legs back in. You can do those double leg, you can do those single leg, depending on the individual's current strength level. And then the set of 15, we did prone hamstring curls against a resistance band. So that was a killer stimulus on that individual's hamstring. Giant hamstring pump, a lot of burn, hit the proximal hamstring, hit the bulk of the muscle belly as well. Second example I have is a kid that I kind of took over his ACL reconstruction rehab at 4 months post-op because he was running behind a little bit, trying to get back to football. We are at a point now where at 7.5 months out, he passes all of our functional tests. So his Y balance test, triple hop test, his 5-meter time test, all of that stuff he has passed. His squat, we took him up to a 10 rep max the other day in the clinic. Looks very symmetrical. We're not seeing any weight shift. We're not seeing any good morning squat faults with him avoiding loading the knees or anything like that. The only deficit that we really still have with that individual is he's still about a 1/2 inch thinner on his surgical side, 1/2 inch less overall limb circumference than his non-surgical side. A month ago, that was 3/4 of an inch. So we're actually actively putting on a good amount of muscle mass here. So really happy about that. But my focus for him right now is I have him doing a day of maximal strength work and power output work, but we're also doing a day that's a little bit more targeted at overall volume and trying to create a little bit of muscle hypertrophy. And we went with the 6-12-25 method for him on this. So in his workout here from the 6-12-25 method, we did 6 cyclist squats. So a cyclist squat is a front squat where we are on a slant board or we have our heels elevated. And what that does is it lets us keep a really, really upright torso, really drive those knees forward. It takes the squat pattern and puts all of the emphasis, or the majority of the emphasis, on loading the quads. So that's a set of 6. His set of 12s were slant board step downs, where the slant board was elevated on top of some bumper plates against a band. So that band is out in front of him and the band is resisting that terminal knee extension so that we have a good, solid, through the full range of motion amount of tension on the quads the entire time. And then instead of 25, we get rid of the band and now he does heels elevated goblet squats. And man, was this kid, like, it was so funny to see him in that set of 25 and he gets to about 15, just that quad shaking so much because it was so fatigued. So it was a great workout from him, really crushed the quads. And then the final example is somebody that we really wanted to work on glute strength and size. And we use 6-12-25 method by going 6 barbell hip thrust. And for that individual, we actually chose a weight that we estimated was around her 8 rep max, 12 lunges off of a low box. We got about a 6-inch box and she lunges back off of that. So we kind of get the hip in deep flexion in the bottom of that reverse lunge, which really kind of loads up the glutes quite a bit. And then finish that out with 25 glute bridges with a really thick mini band around her legs. So she's really emphasizing pressing out into that band and then lifting her hips up. And that created a significant glute burn for her and a significant glute pump for her. So that is the 6-12-25 method. I would highly encourage you to start playing around with this with your patients that have hypertrophy needs, because it's a very great stimulus for pushing muscle hypertrophy, which again, we just don't talk about enough in the physical therapy world. So hope you play that out, play with that. Let me know if you have questions down in the comments. I'll try to get to those later today, and hope you enjoyed this, and we will see you next time. Have a great day, everybody.